How's it going? So today we're going to look at the episode 3 preview for season 2 of House of the Dragon. Okay, so as we can see here, we have an aerial shot of King's Landing and we have an army marching from the gates. Based on the last episode and the strategic planning that we've seen from Daemon and Kristen in episode 1, it's likely that this is going to be the forces of King Aegon II marching to the Crown Lands to try and convince them to swear fealty, based on the words of Kristen Cole and the backing of Vhagar, who's presumably going to join them as Aemon suggested in episode 1. We see this dialogue from Rhaenys saying soon they will not even remember what it was that began the war in the first place. And this is intercut with scenes of her speaking to Rhaenyra, and presumably based on future scenes in this trailer. It's going to be at the funeral of the Cargyle twins who are being buried together. But then it's also intercut with this really interesting scene of these Bracken and Blackwoods. So over here we have the Bracken in this gold with the red stallion on his crest, and these four are all from House Blackwood, and they have some really interesting parallels with the conflict that's happening within the actual Dance of the Dragons themselves. They act as a good metaphor to depict this idea of a war that becomes so monstrous and so prolonged and so laboured that those involved are just so concerned with revenge and bloodlust that they kind of lose sight of what actually began the war in the first place. The Bracken and Blackwood rivalry goes back to the Age of Heroes, but both sides kind of report a different recounting of how it began. From the Bracken side, they claim that they were, kings of the Red Fort during the Age of Heroes, and that the Blackwoods were a vassal house to them in the region when they usurped them and therefore begun the feud. Whereas the Blackwoods allege that they instead were in the position of power, and that the Brackens were merely, petty lords. They were horse breeders who then hired a bunch of sellswords to usurp their position of power. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle of these two stories, but definitely not either of them in their entirety. So we can look at the Bracken sigil, here it is emblazoned on this young man's chest. The sigil is a red rearing stallion on, this golden yellow shield. And so it's likely that there is some truth to this statement from the Blackwoods that they were horse breeders and potentially petty lords. And so, this would have became their sigil based on the fact that that was their occupation. How people would have taken their names and stuff. Smith would have been a family of Smiths. The Blackwood sigil is a flock of ravens on scarlet surrounding a dead weirwood upon a black shield. So if you're thinking that these symbols evoke, this idea of northern imagery, you would be correct, because the Blackwoods are an ancient house that descended from the First Men and originated in the north. And according to Wiki of Ice and Fire, they ruled most of the Wolfswood before being driven south by the Starks. So for this reason, I also think it's pretty reasonable to believe and see some truth in the claim that they weren't the kings in the Riverland at the time that the Brackens may have been, based on the fact that they didn't actually originate there. There you go. So the Blackwoods and Brackens have already featured in House of the Dragon, and we've seen this in season 1, where Rhaenyra is doing her tour to find a suitor, and there is young Willem Blackwood and Gerald Bracken, and Gerald taunts Willem, and they end up engaging in a duel. Willem pulls a sword and ends up slaying Gerald. And, after this scene, we see Rhaenyra essentially fleeing and ending her tour to find a suitor there and marrying Laenor Velaryon. So we see this change in Fire and Blood, where Amos Bracken, challenges and prevails over Samwell Blackwood, And, you know, this is obviously a significant change from what happens in the show in terms of the name change and the victor's house. But it's notable that neither character actually dies in this interaction and instead goes on to war again in the future. In this trailer, it's interesting that we see, you know, the Blackwoods are now seemingly taunting this Bracken boy, and it, you know, it's very much hinting and indicating that this conflict is well and truly continuing long after the initial conflict that we've seen in season 1 between these houses. But it also indicates that we may be tackling a battle that is later seen in the source material, called the Battle of the Burning Mill. So I imagine that we will likely get this in episode 3 if we are to believe that episode 4 is going to be the Battle at Rook's Rest. We had the Cargill twins, who obviously died in the last episode in that really, really tragic duel scene between the pair, and they are being buried together in Dragonstone. We have these shots of Kristen Cole leaning across the back of this chair, and Rhaenys continues saying, "When the desire to kill and burn takes hold." And reason is forgotten. So through that pause, we see Daemon walking through the halls of Harrenhal, to be presumed based on where he indicated that he was planning to go through the end of season 1 when they were, you know, strategizing, and also when he was in the council scene. He is in full armor, he has his sword drawn, helmet on, he is walking through Harrenhal. Presumably this is inside. The castle itself has fallen to disarray for many years, so it's not surprising that we see these weather conditions within the walls. And we have Caraxes flying. He has just gone full-blown one-man army, with the intention to take this house and have this centralized force of power right in the middle of all of the kingdoms of Westeros. And this is, you know, a really essential and significant seat of power, because it's so central. It's a key territory for the war effort of both sides, and obviously, you know, because he doesn't have to worry about bringing an army along with him like the crowd from King's Landing do, he's able to arrive here pretty quickly. Harrenhal is the seat of House Strong, but Larys is currently the Lord of House Strong, you know, after having murdered his father and brother. He's obviously still in King's Landing, and in his stead, I believe Sir Simon Strong is going to be at Harrenhal. So Daemon will likely be going in and slaying all his guards to get to him and have a nice, really, really polite discussion, I'm sure, about how it would be in their best interest to kneel to the Black Queen. We do see in the Weeks Ahead trailer that was released last week that he ends up having some sort of supper or, you know, dining experience with the Strongs within Harrenhal. So clearly successful to some degree. So we have yet to see how far that degree is going to go. So at the end of this quote, "When reason is forgotten," we have this close-up on Jace, and, you know, he has his furrowed brow. He looks agitated, to say the least. We haven't really seen him like this. We seen him in the last episode with Bela, you know, mourning his brother and talking about his complicated father relationships. But it seems here, after, you know, having lost his brother already, and now seeing that the Greens have made an assassination attempt on his mother, it looks like he's just kind of allowed this darkness to take over him, and this, you know, the stereotypical Targaryen rage. He isn't going to take kindly to this act of violence that is being attempted on his mother. So we're probably going to see the outfall of that to some degree in episode 3, I imagine. Again, we have Caraxes just giving us a performance. Again, you know, encapsulating this Targaryen rage. You know, they have the blood of the dragon. Blood of the dragon runs hot. And Kristen Cole, of course, always has something to say. Fabian Frankel is an absolutely wonderful actor. He plays this hateable character so well. All the characters are very well acted. The actors are doing an amazing job. But he says, you know, we can't sit in the castle and wait for war to come to us. We see these new banners unfurl, and it seems like they're really going all out with the branding. Hopefully it'll be a bit more consistent now going ahead with Team Green. So they have this gold three-headed dragon, which, you know, is obviously a reflection of Sunfire, supposedly the most beautiful dragon in the realm, but obviously we all know that the most beautiful dragon in the realm is Moondancer. You know, it has this golden dragon on this field of green, obviously the high tower green. This evokes imagery of, you know, that quote we got in season 1 from Lord Larys about how when the high towers go to war, the high tower burns green. And, you know, we have this image of Alicent coming out in her green dress and it just being absolutely show-stopping at Rhaenyra's wedding. You have that same kind of imagery being evoked here with this green that's now going to be decking out the whole army, the Red Keep. All of the royal family have been wearing this throughout the past 2 episodes, so you can really tell that that's coming with a war plan and it's going to be part of their propaganda rollout. We go into the council and obviously we have this shot here of Aemond looking very excited about going to war. And we have Aegon responding to Kristen Cole's statement that we can't just sit around the castle, we have to start this war. We have Aegon replying with good to war then. And, you know, this shot of poor Alicent just looking like she's absolutely full of dread. She's in this room now with these men at the table, obviously her morning son, who is just so ready to go to war because his son and heir has been murdered. We have Kristen Cole, obviously, over here. He's obviously there just completely spurning Aegon on. He's still somehow harbouring this resentment for Rhaenyra. And then we have Aemond at the other end of the table who's just sitting smirking with his anime villain eye patch, just ready to go. He's ready to roll up with Vhagar and cause some chaos and do a light bit of murdering under the guise of his loyalty to his brother and his house. It's pretty notable that Aegon's looking real happy now. We're really going to see this descent into Targaryen madness now from him, I think. I think that was the final blow last episode. We've seen the full spectrum of emotions from him. In those first 2 episodes between, you know, the joy and jovial behaviour and, you know, this jingoistic nonsense that he had going on in the first episode that was really endearing. And then we seen just, you know, the utter rage and then this really, really deep and, you know, touching sorrow that he expressed at the loss of his son. So now I think we're seeing the depths into madness by episode 3. It's going to be really interesting. And again, we have this, you know, shot of them marching out and Rhaenyra stating that Alicent is in King's Landing, and these shots for walking through. And Rhaenyra saying her son sits my throne. And I always think it's really interesting the way that she always refers to Aegon as Alicent's son. You know, it's never Aegon sitting my throne and like blaming him. It's always Alicent's son is sitting my throne. You know, almost as if she's like, then everything's happened because of her, and, you know, she went off and married my father and produced these heirs, and now she's, you know, usurped my throne. Everything's always pinned back on Alicent, and, you know, it's almost like Rhaenyra is practicing this detachment with Aegon, where she's not actually putting the blame on him, and she's not even calling him her brother, you know, accepting that he's her blood. And that's potentially because she doesn't really want to accept the fact that that would then make her someone who is going up against her own kin, someone who's willing to sacrifice her own blood. But it's very much practicing this detachment between her and, you know, the other side of her family, the children of Alicent and Viserys. So again, we have Alicent in her mourning veil going down to light her candles in the sept, and I mean, of course, she's going to be lighting another candle for her own grandson, which is going to be really tragic, I'm sure, in the next episode. But it's going to be interesting to see if there's anybody else that she's lighting candles for. You know, she might not light one for Luke this time. So the speaker says there has been no word from Daemon. And then we have these shots here of, you know, Daemon obviously standing up here again, full armor. And these really, really like horror movie-esque shots of Harrenhal and it being lit by the thunder, and obviously the whole place is soaked from the rain. and it just seems like this endless labyrinth that goes on and on. I think they're really going to pull on these horror visuals throughout, especially the Harrenhal scenes, I imagine, throughout the whole season. But especially in this part here where he's infiltrating the castle, I think it's going to be very, very anxiety provoking. I'm looking forward to it. Rhaenyra looks unimpressed but not surprised. She knows Daemon's nature and the fact that he's going to take the castle on his own, especially given the fact that he had very similar behaviour in Stepstones. I don't think she's going to be very surprised at all, but she also knows that he is very effective. He's a very efficient warrior, and especially when he's driven by this need to prove himself. And he very much left that last conversation with this arrogance about him of, I'm going to go and show you if you're sitting doubting my loyalty. I'm just after telling you I'm going to go to Harrenhal and I'm going to, capture the Riverlands for you. She knows that if anyone's going to go and get Harrenhal for her, especially single-handedly, it's going to be Daemon. Her council don't seem particularly confident in Daemon because they don't trust his nature, and obviously we've seen in the last episode that she also does not trust him. And a lovely little shot of Daemon wrecking heads. Yeah, there we go. Beautiful, beautiful costumes in this season. I mean, they were beautiful in the first season, but they've really, really stepped it up for this one. We must press with what advantage we do have, and then it's undercut with this shot of obviously the Dragon Keeper here very interestingly has these scars on her face, but it's Rhaenyra with her son Jace and then Baela and Rhaena, and she's saying here, or it's said here from the council member, that we must press with what advantage we do have, and we can see that the Dragon Keepers are showing this clutch of 4 eggs to the royal house. One of them is this lilac blue colour. There's one here that's green, one that's red, and one is gold. And a lot of people are talking about how this obviously evokes imagery, especially with the green, red, and gold of Daenerys dragon eggs. And obviously they're slightly different because they've been petrified. But then we have the burning question: what about the 4th dragon egg? If they are going to try and imply that these are Daenerys's. Which would also throw up some interesting questions for the fandom, because people have generally believed that they come from Dreamfire, but we have yet to see. We have yet to see where they're going to go with this. I am not sure if these are the ones that Daemon pulled from Syrax's clutch that she laid, but they are pushing forward with what they do have, and as council member 2 asks, what's that? Dragons. They have more dragons than the Greens, and though they have smaller dragons, they have more dragon riders. Shot of her council, notably, as we spoke about, Daemon not here, but also notably none of the children we seen in the last episode are here, so begs the question, where are they? And Rhaenys sitting at the head of the table with her, the beauty that is Moondancer, and Baela riding along with her. So they're going to be going and patrolling the skies of King's Landing, staying high, not drawing attention, and being very, very cautious, hopefully. But yeah, it looks like they might not be doing a whole load of being inconspicuous based on other scenes in this trailer. Yeah, does not look like she's hiding up in the clouds to me. But again, this brundled pattern, absolutely stunning. I love the design that they did for this for this dragon. Just absolutely impeccable. We have this really brief shot of Aegon just going for it with his dagger again. Clearly does not know the value of it, and it having the prophecy of ice and fire, but sure, would we expect him to even pay any heed to that anyway if he did know? Probably not. He's so consumed with rage. If dragons began fighting dragons, we invite our own destruction. And through that, we have scenes of Rhaenys and Corlys speaking here, and it looks like they're having quite a serious conversation. We'll find out what they're talking about in the next episode, I'm sure. And then seems like this individual is running from a dragon arriving up here. Unsure of what dragon that is at the moment. And we have a full full armor shot of King Aegon, and he's looking very, very concerned. He's drinking from a cup of wine, possibly going back to his old ways of indulging in some alcoholism. If he's planning to go out to battle, in this whole get up here, he has never been to battle, so we're gonna have to see how he reacts and responds to that, emotionally, physically. It's gonna be very interesting for him and for the viewer, I'm sure. And again, just the texture that when dragons go to war, we invite our own destruction. And again, this calls back to the end of season 1. Arax went and shot fire at Vhagar. Vhagar did not respond kindly to that and ended up killing Luke and Arax. And neither rider was able to control their dragon. It didn't matter if they were using Valyrian commands. It didn't matter if they were... It didn't matter. Once the dragons had decided what they were going to do, they were going to do it regardless of what the rider wanted. And we have some shots of knights on horseback running through the woods. Now we have Rhaenyra looking up and looking, again, unimpressed. She looks quite furious here. Or quite determined. Finishing up that statement, it'll be savage beyond all compare. Before this, we've never had wars between dragon riders, between dragon lords within the House Targaryen. We've never had a civil war to this degree. So this really is something that is beyond comprehension for those who are living in Westeros, and for those involved in the war. There's never been war on this scale on the continent, so they've no scope to even compare it to. And here we have what looks like Daemon entering some actually lit halls in Harrenhal, presumably living quarters, perhaps of Sir Simon Strong. And then we have Baela and Moondancer, and we see her wrapping them reins around her wrist real tight and looking very determined. And a beautiful Moondancer here taking a nosedive towards some men on the ground, which really, really is not doing what Rhaenyra asked of her. Really, really not subtly patrolling the skies of King's Landing and staying above the crowds, or above the clouds, and trying to remain inconspicuous. Complete opposite of that, actually. I think a lot of what we're going to see in this next episode is going to be, the planning between the two war councils, between the Black and Green councils, but especially in the Green Council, obviously, because they've just removed Otto and installed Criston Cole as the Hand of the King. Their king is absolutely enraged and going into the throes of madness, and Aemond is absolutely raring to get out in Vhagar and cause some chaos. So we're going to see a complete, flip of the approach to the war from the Greens now. Most of the action that's coming from the Black's side currently is going to come in the form of Daemon in Harrenhal, which I think is going to be the second big key feature of this episode. It's going to be him infiltrating the castle, stalking the halls, and I imagine conquering the castle. And that's going to be our second major theme. I think our third big topic that we're going to head on is this conflict between the Blackwoods and the Brackens, and potentially get Burn and Mill in this episode if we are potentially going to get Rook's Rest in episode 4. And I think the final thing is addressing what's going on with Baela and Moondancer, because this could be some sort of distraction, it could be some sort of trap. She could be being lured into something, she could be being lured away from something, if they are trying to get her away from the walls of King's Landing so that they can take Vhagar out or take Vhagar in Sunfire. It's unclear at the minute, because this is not in the source material. Moondancer is not writable at this point. It's going to be interesting to see what's actually happening in these scenes and what it leads to in future episodes. So, excited for episode 3, and I'll see y'all then.